Well, this is from my aunt. I wanted to know how to do some sharpening. A couple knives that you cannot sharpen with these very well would be these curved in blades on a typical knife sharpening system. Another one, a Benchmade, got that little bit of recurve in there. This isn't really made for that. You'd need croc sticks, something like that. Spyderco as well. Now this guy is built for this. Notice how I have a sharpening choil right here, right at the heel. Right here, that would be the tip. I always go from the heel to the tip every single time. I'll go ahead and get that viced in there. This is actually a Ketiped sharpener. It's something I got a month or two ago, replacing a Ruxin Pro. I had some issues with the Ruxin Pro because it has a spring in there and maybe not the best fit for the bolt that's supposed to hold it in. So eventually, if you're not paying attention to it, it'll loosen itself out, and then you end up getting a projectile, the back end. Anyways, to find this edge, you want to take a little bit of a Sharpie marker. I don't know exactly what this edge is, but this ought to tell me. Whenever you're moving the knife, just get into the habit, especially if you're sharpening pocket knives, to always keep the handle to the north, and you're keeping the pivot from getting all the shavings that are going to be coming off the knife getting into your pivot, and it'll get all crunchy. You're not going to like it. So now that we've done that, I'll go ahead and place in a 3000 grit stone. You want the lightest stone when you're trying to figure out what angle you're actually sharpening at, what angle this needs. If you're going too low, let's say 12 or 13 and this is a 20, then it's going to end up hitting behind the edge, way behind the edge. And when you're done with sharpening it, you're still going to have a little rough spot from where you were bringing your knife across. So using a 3000 grit, make that a little bit easier. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this. And that tells me I need to go north a little bit. So instead of where I was currently at, I need a steeper angle. So I'm going to go ahead and do it again. And I'm getting warmer. Notice I have this piece of paper that's down here. That's actually to help me out with being able to see the line on the edge of the bevel. So I'm going to go up just a little bit more. Try to get a little bit more of that bevel. Yeah, not too close to it yet. Another swipe. Don't over tighten these. You over tighten them, you screw up your clamp, and then you'll never get to you'll have one side that you're sharpening a 17 degree, the other side you're sharpening it at 30. I mean, they can get pretty warped. Ruxin Pro is pretty bad about that. The newer ones are a little bit better, but I would say they still got a little bit of fine tuning to go. So that's about where it's at. So I'm going to go ahead and trade this 3000 out, and we're going to do a full reprofile, but we're going to keep it close. So reprofile is going to start at 120 grit. So I'm going to go ahead and take this angle finder. I'm going to place it up on top. So I know that it's good if it sits at about 15.5, 15.1. Click the 0. Bring this back. Place it down on top of there. So this is looking like 18.6. Let me get that dialed in just a bit. Sometimes just tapping a little bit helps reset this. There we go. So that looks good. I'll go ahead and turn off my digital angle finder, and we'll call that a day. Alright, so once we get started, notice this piece right here. If you don't have it set right, you can actually pull to where this doesn't actually meet the bevel. So I went ahead and figured it out. So now my stop stops before I end up going across the bevel with it. And the same for the other side. You don't want to be pushing in and then you slip off the stone. So we're going to start with 10. I'm going to go in just a little bit. 10. Take a piece of paper. Looks like we just about got that solved. So I'm going to flip the edge over. I'm going to keep my pivot north of where the shavings will go. Alright, flip it back over. I'm going to do another 10 because this is a reprofile. I've probably had this knife, early 2004, and it's seen a lot of use over the years. Now if you're watching and you're trying to wonder, oh, how much pressure is he putting on it? I'm basically letting the stone's gravity, the weight, down on it, and then I'm just pushing it. That's all I'm doing. If I'm adding anything extra on a lot of these, if you put that little extra force in there, it's going to cause the thing to flex a little bit, or if you're very thin edge, it's going to cause it to flex too. So I did my 10s. I went ahead and did 2 sets of 10s, and I feel like I've reached the apex of the bevels. Basically, I don't have any marker left on the edge from the heel to the tip. So I feel good with that. So next you're going to do 5s. And if you goof up, feel like one of your swipes isn't very good, add an extra swipe. It's not really going to hurt too much. You're just trying to keep it as even as possible. A lot of the makers out there making knives, if you really study all the angles that they're using on there, sometimes you'll realize that they don't add up. They're not in the same spots. Or you go to sharpen a knife and one side is getting chewed apart and you have a really big bevel and the other side has a really small one, and you know you haven't over tightened. Chances are they just weren't fully aligned, and that happens. Monday and Friday knives are a real thing, just like cars, trucks, anything else. Alright, so I did my 5s. And you're probably wondering, like, if I go to resharpen this, how am I going to know exactly where to clamp this on? Well, there's a little line that goes from here all the way up to here, and most knives are going to have that. If they don't, they don't. Then you're going to look at a logo or something like that, or a 1/2 inch in, something like that. But you always want to keep clamping them in the exact same spot. So now that I'm done with my 5s, I'm going to go ahead and do 3s. The reason why I'm pushing in instead of going back and forth is I don't want a big burr. I don't want to deal with a big burr. I want to deal with goofing around with that and then having to do too much extra to it. So I just move it in this way. I'm just removing it all the way until I get down to the edge. Now, will I have a burr? Yes. But will it be a gigantic burr? No. It also depends on the steel you're using. This is 154 cm. So I shouldn't have too big of a burr. But anyways. So I know that the edge is pretty decent. I don't feel like there's one spot that's any worse than anything else. And it's very toothy because that's 120 grit. So I'm going to go ahead and move it up to the 600 grit. Now, when you're on the 600 grit, that was a big jump. 120 to 600 is fairly big. So this part, I'm going to go ahead and do 20 or 10 and 10, and then another 10 and 10 before I go down to the 5s and 3s. There we go. There we go. You don't want to go sliding completely off the edge. You'll basically round out your point. So I try not to do that very often. You're going to do it. It's okay. Just try not to. There we go. A 600 grit, some people say that's where the sharpening starts. I mean, where 120 starts, you can start cutting paper, but I think that anything from 100 grit all the way up to 600 grit is something that I'm using more for reprofiling. If I've sharpened a knife 2-3 times, the knife's pretty much where it needs to be. So unless I'm nicking into something that's causing major damage on it, I'm going to start off at 1,000. If I've put a lot of wear and tear on it, I might go down to a 600. I'm not using a 120 for anything other than reprofiling. It's just not really needed. Another thing to think of is when you're doing the knife, the 2 worst spots from any maker is typically going to be the heel and it's going to be the tip. And the reason those 2 spots are the worst is because they're using a belt typically, and that's where they're coming into their grind. And then when they're exiting the grind, those are the 2 spots that are going to be affected the most. So when I first sharpen a knife, if the tip isn't perfect or if the heel isn't perfect, oh well. There's a whole lot of steel that's in there and a whole lot of sharpenings in there in between where the heel is perfect and the tip is perfect, and I'd rather use that metal than just shave it all away in one day. It's not really necessary. So I usually get about 80% of the knife where I want it to be, and then I'm happy with it. I usually don't think that a knife is completely done, especially one of mine, because I'm real picky about how a bevel is or an edge. I really don't think it's done until you've gotten the third sharpening in. Then you don't have to worry about, you know, the belt burn potentially, where they're running on a belt and it might affect the heat treat, something like that. Once you've gotten into your third sharpening, most people kind of agree that that's kind of where you've moved enough metal away that what you have is good steel with a good heat treat. And set of 3 swipes. And between 600 and 1,000, which is my next stone, that's another big jump. So I'm going to go ahead and do 2 sets of 10s before I do my 5s and I do my 3s. This is where you actually start polishing the blade down a little bit. It's actually moving more into that than truly sharpening it. There we go. It's actually where it'll start getting a lot more reflective and get that mirror in there. You really don't start seeing it jump up too much until hit about 2,000. Here we go. All right. Most of this thing's life I've actually sharpened it on crock sticks, so this is kind of new for it. Now if you look on it a little bit, it might be a little bit difficult, but this thing is just a hair out of center. So one side's just a little bit bigger of a bevel than the other side. And I'll show you whenever we take this off the stone. Oh, and the reason why I use tape, metal on metal, it's kind of slippery. It's not really going to lock in the way that you want it to. So I put this tape on there, and that actually helps hold it into place. If I use the tape, I don't have to tighten these down as much, which means that I'm not bending these all up trying to hold on to something. Putting a little bit of tape on there and a little bit of pressure. And then whenever I'm sliding this back and forth, I'm also not putting my weight into it or anything like that. I'm just pushing it along. And you'll know you're pushing weight on it because you'll start seeing it move. You start seeing it bend. That's also why I like the lines. If you put it up against a line and you see something start to shift, then you know you're making a mistake. And for years and years of use, actually you can't see it on there. Go ahead and flip you back over. This spot right here is a little bit of a divot, and that's from running crock sticks. Sharpening one side, sharpening the other, sharpening one side, sharpening the other. But staying off the heel, because if you hit the crock stick, you can actually see the little bit of a smile across that little bit of shine right in that choil. That's from hitting the crock stick just a little bit funny. So now I'm on my 3s. This knife will probably be sharper than the day it came from the factory off the first sharpen. The only parts that'll be a little bit less be that heel and that tip. by the time I sharpen this the third time, everything will be perfect. Heel to tip. Go ahead and move up to 1500. And it's going to be a pretty bevel for a knife that's over 20 years old. Now move on to 5s. Might not be able to see it very well, but as I flip it back and forth, I can see just a hint of a burr that's on there. And a little tiny burr is real easy to remove. Alright, get her down into the 3s. And let's see how well she cuts it. By now I've pretty much gotten it to a point where it's about as sharp as it'll be. So big difference. Big difference on how that's cut on the paper. Feels real nice. I'm happy with it. Alright, 2000. Go ahead and slap that in there. Oop. Something else to think of. See how they print that on there? Don't put that at the tip where you're starting your cutout. Don't do that. Put it down at the back. So my numbers aren't on this side. They're all the way down there. All the way at the end. So I'll go ahead and there we go. We're ready for the 5s. I actually bought this knife when I was in Iraq. My very first deployment. I had me a fancy automatic, and I wanted something for the pocket, and here in Kansas, carrying around an automatic knife was illegal. So whenever I was getting ready to come back, that knife I could carry in my uniform, but I couldn't carry it around, so I bought this as my everyday carry, and it stayed pretty much that way until about at least 2014. And then I started buying knives again, but basically as soon as I saw this knife and had my sweet little fancy automatic and had a couple little Benchmade fixed blades, I thought that there'd be no improvement in the world of knives, and I'd bought the best knives that could ever be made, and 154 cm was the greatest steel ever known to man, so why would I need to buy another knife ever again? I was wrong. And 3s. And now she's pretty much mirror polished. But if you wanted it truly mirrored, you would at least do 20. and then go down to your 5s, and then go down to your 3s, or even maybe 30 if it's a large jump. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually still leaving a little bit of tooth in there. Not a lot, but there's still a little in there. There we go. All right, now I'm jumping back to that 3000 stone we started off with, so we could find our edge. All right. There we go. And she's basically a mirror now. I overshot that one, so I guess we're going to do 10s again. Now take just a little more tooth out of it. So you might be wondering, tooth, no tooth. What's the big difference on that? Why should I care? Why would I worry? If you want something to bite in real quick, you want the teeth on there. So basically it's just a micro serration. So on the bottom of these, all of these little miniature diamonds are still going to put little pits and or peaks and valleys across the bevel. Now when you're sitting at 120, you can see the difference. That's going to make much larger peaks and valleys. So the more you smooth it down, the more you lose those. Is that a big deal? No. Just kind of depends on what type of cutting you're doing. For me, I actually prefer having the most polished edge possible. And the reason is because, well, the edge works longer. Is it necessarily better? Well, at certain tasks, no. Certain things where you want to touch the blade to something and you kind of want it to stick to it, you want the teeth. Rope, things like that are going to be moving while you're trying to cut with it. Teeth are important. Cutting toilet paper rolls, cutting water bottles as they're standing, being able to push onto them. A hacking motion, having the teeth on there is real good. This is more or less the highly polish. I just feel like it sticks around a lot longer, so it stays sharp for longer, but it's not really going to bite in the way that teeth do. And some people like a happy medium, where they have it fairly toothy, but still pretty close to polished. I just like what I like. There we go. And now down to 3s. It's always going to be 10s, 5s, 3s. Okay, 3000 is done, and now we're on to the strop. If you notice, most strops are not perfect. It's a piece of leather, it's glued on. Whenever you put your compound on there, it's not going to be perfect. Put a little on there, you can put a whole bunch on there, you're going to have bumps. Now, with the leather, we're not sharpening this way. We're going to pull down this way. And if you notice the thickness of this, versus the thickness of this is quite a bit different. So what that means is that where this is going to rest on this is more towards the edge than towards the back of that bevel. What that's going to do is it's going to cause like a micro convex to it. So it's going to round it out a little bit. Like I said, and that makes it sturdy. If you had a real toothy edge, like I said, the more toothy it is, the more that's going to erode quicker. So on this one, I like to do it 20 times with the strop. Now you might be wondering what type of compound you might want to put onto a strop. You can use the green stuff. My favorite just happens to be Flex Cut Gold. That's my absolute favorite. It'll put a mirror polish, and it still removes enough with each swipe that I feel like it's getting something accomplished. But will it mirror polish as well as, let's say, the green compounds? Well, yeah, I think it does. Well, if you really want, you can be nitpicky and you can do another 5 swipes on it or another 4 swipes on it on each side. You can vary it back and forth, 3. Doesn't really matter. It's just whatever you're comfortable with. But at a minimum, it's going to take you about 18 swipes. If you were doing the math, anywhere between 18 and 28 swipes to remove most of the grit that was a little bit higher. So that's what you're after. And that should be the cleanest cut, and I would say it is. So we're going to go ahead and get this thing removed. I don't really like cleaning the knife when it's still clamped in. I'll go ahead and get my tape off there. Go ahead and grab a lens wipe cleaner. The only thing you really need is rubbing alcohol. We'll take this stuff off. Now if this was a real fancy knife, and believe me, I work on them, all that compound you don't want smeared up into here, because it's going to cause it to look different depending on what finish you're using. Anyways, I just grab one of these wipes, and I work the rest of that compound off. And I work the rest of the Sharpie marker off of it. Not that it really matters too much. Now if I'm using a kitchen knife, I definitely don't want that Sharpie marker on there. But this is an old workhorse. I've sharpened it many, many times over the course of my life. And just going to keep sharpening and using, doling and sharpening, and then using. Alright, so point looks pretty good. The tip right down in here. See how that metal thickens out and it comes up in? So that is always going to be a little bit off until you completely finish it. But for the most part, we got her done. See it? Right there. Got a little spot where the sharpener kind of goes and then back into the cut. And that's also where the crock sticks kind of scalloped it out a little bit more. So that shine is just a little bit off, and there it is. You can see it right here. That's the area. So I'll probably take one more sharpening, maybe two, but I'm not willing to lose all that steel out of it. That's why I still have a knife left after so many years of use. And I mean, this thing's been abused and trumped all over the place. It's an Osborne mini barrage. That's what you are. And still fairly solid. Still got the locking mechanism on it, so you can't loosen it up and pull that off. So it's a fairly trustable lock. But there you go. That's how to sharpen a knife in 37 minutes.